This is the Grant Caldwell Report, and if you care about accountability in Washington, you need to stay with me for the next few minutes. Because what unfolded during a Senate fraud hearing this week was not routine oversight. It was a public, on-camera breakdown between Josh Hawley and Keith Ellison that raised serious questions about enforcement, political power, and whether anyone is actually being held responsible. Within minutes, voices were raised, accusations flew, and the word jail was said, not metaphorically, not hypothetically, but directly, during a live congressional proceeding. Now here's why this matters. This wasn't cable news theater or a campaign rally soundbite. This happened during a formal Senate hearing focused on alleged fraud tied to Minnesota-based programs involving taxpayer funds. The exchange has since gone viral, but most coverage is only showing you the shouting, not the substance behind it. In the next 60 seconds, I'm going to walk you through what is confirmed, what is being alleged, and the one detail many headlines are skipping that changes how this confrontation should be understood. According to multiple outlets, Senator Hawley accused the Minnesota Attorney General's office of failing to act on documented fraud claims. Hawley pressed Ellison repeatedly, pointing to reports and investigative findings suggesting enforcement delays and missed prosecutions. Ellison fired back, rejecting the premise and challenging Hawley's characterization of the facts. What is confirmed is this: the hearing escalated rapidly, the exchange became personal, and Senate decorum broke down in full view of the public. What remains unclear, and critically important, is whether the underlying fraud allegations were ignored, mishandled, or misrepresented. That distinction matters, because if enforcement failures occurred, taxpayers pay the price. And if accusations are being overstated for political effect, that also deserves scrutiny. This is not about personalities. This is about power, responsibility, and whether the system works when billions in public money are on the line. Stay with me, because once we separate verified facts from rhetoric, this confrontation looks very different. To understand why this exchange escalated so quickly, you have to understand the subject of the hearing, not just the volume of the argument. The Senate hearing was focused on alleged large-scale fraud involving taxpayer-funded programs, including questions about how fraud claims, once identified, are investigated, prosecuted, or declined at the state level. This was not a general political hearing. It was oversight tied to enforcement responsibility. Senator Hawley's line of questioning centered on whether the Minnesota Attorney General's office had sufficient evidence to act earlier in specific fraud cases and whether delays allowed losses to grow. Hawley cited reports and investigative findings that, according to him, pointed to warning signs that were either missed or not acted on aggressively enough. The Attorney General rejected that framing. He argued that prosecutions take time, that his office has pursued fraud cases when evidence met legal thresholds, and that Hawley's characterization oversimplified complex investigations. He pushed back forcefully, disputing both the timeline and the implication of inaction. This is where the hearing broke down. What began as oversight questioning turned into a direct confrontation over accountability. Hawley pressed repeatedly on why charges were not filed sooner. The Attorney General responded by challenging Hawley's understanding of prosecutorial discretion and investigative limits. Voices rose. Interruptions followed. The exchange became heated enough that committee leadership had to attempt to restore order. Here is what is confirmed. The hearing involved oversight of fraud tied to public funds. Hawley accused the AG's office of failing to act promptly. The AG denied wrongdoing and rejected the premise. The exchange escalated into a shouting match on the record. What is not confirmed is whether enforcement failures occurred. That determination depends on evidence, prosecutorial standards, and case-specific facts that were not fully litigated in the hearing itself. This distinction is critical. Congressional hearings are designed to expose issues, not adjudicate guilt. Oversight can surface concerns, but it does not replace criminal proceedings or internal reviews. The confrontation revealed tension, not conclusions. And that raises the key question moving forward. Was this confrontation about uncovering the truth, or about how accountability is being framed for the public? Once the hearing clips went viral, the narrative hardened fast, and much of it moved beyond what the record actually shows. One claim circulating widely is that the shouting match itself proves misconduct. It doesn't. Heated exchanges signal conflict, not conclusions. Congressional hearings are adversarial by design, and raised voices, while notable, are not evidence of wrongdoing. Another claim is that the Minnesota Attorney General's office ignored fraud outright. That allegation was asserted during questioning, but it has not been established by a judicial finding or a completed investigation presented on the record. Prosecutorial discretion matters here. Decisions about when or whether to file charges depend on evidence thresholds, witness cooperation, and case readiness, not political timelines. On the other side, some commentary suggests Senator Hawley's questioning was purely performative. That too oversimplifies what happened. Oversight hearings exist to pressure agencies to explain decisions, timelines, and priorities. Pressing on delays is a legitimate oversight function, even when the tone escalates. So where does accountability actually live? It lives in documentation, case files, charging decisions, and outcomes, not in volume. If fraud occurred and enforcement was delayed without justification, that is a serious failure. If investigations were active but incomplete, that context matters just as much. The hearing did not resolve that tension, it exposed it. What the confrontation did accomplish was clarity on one point. There is a gap between how oversight views urgency and how prosecutors view readiness. That gap is where frustration grows, and where hearings like this turn combustible. Viewers should also note what did not happen. No new evidence was introduced on the spot. No charges were announced. No admissions were made. The exchange reflected disagreement over responsibility, not a finding of fault. That distinction matters for public trust. Accountability is not about who speaks loudest. It's about whether institutions can explain their decisions with evidence and withstand scrutiny without deflection. Oversight is supposed to test that. Which brings us to the final question. What does this moment change, if anything, and what should viewers watch for after the cameras are off? So what does this confrontation actually change? In the short term, not much procedurally, and that's important to understand. Senate hearings don't file charges, they don't convict, and they don't substitute for investigations. What they do is apply public pressure, force explanations onto the record, and expose where accountability is being contested rather than resolved. That's exactly what happened here. The shouting match between Senator Hawley and the Minnesota Attorney General did not establish guilt, nor did it clear anyone. What it did was spotlight a fundamental tension in the system. Lawmakers demand urgency and visible action, while prosecutors operate under evidentiary thresholds and timelines that don't bend to political heat. If fraud occurred and enforcement lagged without justification, that will ultimately surface through documents, case filings, and outcomes, not through volume in a hearing room. And if allegations are being overstated for political effect, that too becomes clear when facts are tested against the record. What viewers should watch next isn't rhetoric, it's follow-through. Will there be formal reviews? Will additional documentation be requested? Will cases move forward, stall, or quietly close? Those answers won't come from viral clips. They'll come from filings, audits, and prosecutorial decisions after the cameras are gone. This moment matters not because of how loud it got, but because it revealed how fragile trust becomes when accountability feels unclear. Oversight only works if it leads to transparency, not just confrontation. This is the Grant Caldwell Report. We don't confuse heat for proof. We don't confuse hearings for verdicts. And we don't stop at the clip. We follow the process. If you want continued fact-driven coverage as this develops, like this video, subscribe, and turn notifications on. We'll track what happens after the noise fades.